31 Cubans are dead, not from war, not from disease, from hunger, caused by a naval blockade ordered 3 weeks ago from the Oval Office. And the only thing standing between those 11 million people and a resolution is a single word that neither government will say out loud. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you will understand exactly why $8 billion is sitting on a table going nowhere, and why the real battle has nothing to do with money. I'm covering this story daily because it is moving faster than any outlet is tracking. If you haven't already, hit subscribe right now so you don't miss what happens next, because this could break open within hours. Here is what just happened. On April 18th, Cuba's deputy foreign minister stood before cameras and made the most significant diplomatic offer in 6 decades. His government is prepared to pay American citizens and corporations full compensation for every property seized after the 1959 revolution. Not through individual lawsuits, not through years of litigation. A single lump sum, $8 billion, negotiated government to government, paid over 30 years through trade revenue, tourism fees, and asset sales. Certified claims covering nearly 6,000 properties, hotels, sugar plantations, utility companies, private homes, frozen since the year John F. Kennedy was inaugurated. Cuba has done this before. They settled with Britain, France, and Spain decades ago using exactly this model. The framework is real, the offer is serious, and Donald Trump said no. Not because the money isn't enough, not because the payment structure is unworkable, because Cuba will not say one word: theft. Trump is demanding that Havana formally acknowledge that the 1959 nationalizations were not sovereign acts of a revolutionary government. They were theft, state-sponsored robbery. And Cuba, whose entire legal and political foundation rests on the legitimacy of those nationalizations, has refused every American president who ever asked, from Eisenhower through Biden, and is refusing again now. So keep that in your mind, because we are going to come back to why that single word matters more than the $8 billion attached to it. Before we get there, you need to understand who is actually caught in this. Maria Gonzalez was 11 years old when her family walked out of their home in Miramar for the last time. Her father owned a textile factory. Both the house and the factory were seized in 1960. She is in her late 70s now. She still has the property documents. She kept them her entire life. "I never thought I would see this day," she told reporters. "But I also never imagined we would have to accept it was legal to steal from us." That is the emotional weight Trump is leveraging. For hundreds of thousands of Cuban American families, this is not a real estate dispute. It is a question of whether the United States government will stand in history and call what happened to them a crime, or quietly cash a check and move on. Subscribe if you want the daily update on where this goes. This series has been tracking the escalation for 22 consecutive episodes, and every single one has mattered. Marco Rubio, Secretary of State and the son of Cuban exiles himself, stated flatly on April 20th that any deal without restored property rights is a surrender to communist theft. Within hours, Cuba's foreign ministry responded that sovereignty is not negotiable. Rubio then proposed a compromise. Both governments issue separate statements, parallel narratives, each characterizing 1959 in their own terms. No joint declaration, no agreed language. Cuba rejected it the same day. "We will not participate in diplomatic theater where both sides pretend to agree while saying opposite things," Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez said in a televised address. "Either there is mutual respect or there is nothing." Mexico's president flew to Havana, then to Washington. "Both sides want resolution," she told reporters. "They just define resolution completely differently. That is where diplomacy ended and the blockade began." The USS Carl Vinson Carrier Strike Group has been positioned 90 miles north of Havana for 3 weeks. 12 destroyers and cruisers have sealed the Straits of Florida. No commercial shipping has reached Cuban ports since April 1st. The United Nations says food imports have stopped entirely. Fuel reserves have roughly 10 days left. Hospitals are running on backup generators. Havana went dark for 6 hours on April 19th when the power grid failed. Venezuela attempted to run a humanitarian convoy through. A U.S. destroyer fired warning shots. The ships turned back. The Pan American Health Organization declared a public health emergency on April 23rd. The EU called the blockade collective punishment. Russia and China are pushing for a UN Security Council vote. The General Assembly is set to vote April 28th on a resolution condemning the blockade. It will almost certainly pass. It always does. Last year it was 187-2. It will change nothing. Here is what almost no one is explaining, and this is the part that reframes everything. Trump is not demanding the word theft because he cares about 1960s property law. He is demanding it because that word, legally applied, dissolves the foundation of the Cuban state itself. Property rights in Cuba, every deed, every title, every state-owned enterprise, rests on the legitimacy of those 1959 nationalizations. If Havana concedes they were crimes, the legal basis for everything built on top of them collapses, not through military force, through a single word in a diplomatic agreement. Cuba understands this perfectly. Paying the $8 billion costs Cuba $8 billion. Saying the word costs Cuba everything. That is not stubbornness. That is a government recognizing an existential trap and refusing to step into it. And here is the question that goes even further. What happens if Trump actually wins this argument? Because if the United States successfully uses a naval blockade to force a sovereign government to retroactively criminalize its own founding act, every government that ever nationalized foreign assets is watching. Mexico in the 1938 oil nationalization, Iran in 1979, Venezuela in the 2000s. The word theft applied to Cuba becomes a legal weapon, applicable to every one of them. This standoff is not about one island. It is about whether economic coercion can be used to rewrite the legal history of sovereign nations, and whether every other country watching is drawing the conclusion that they could be next. Here is exactly where things stand. Cuba has offered $8 billion payable over 30 years. Trump rejected it because Cuba will not call the seizures theft. The naval blockade is now in its 19th day. 31 Cubans have died from malnutrition-related causes since April 1st. Hospitals are rationing medicine. The power grid is failing. Rubio's compromise proposal, parallel statements, was rejected within hours. Mexico's mediation collapsed. The UN vote will pass and will change nothing. Cuban exiles are divided. Some want the money regardless. Others say taking it without the admission of wrongdoing validates the theft itself. Neither side is wrong, and neither government is moving. The gap between $8 billion and no deal is not a number. It is one word, and that word is costing lives counted in the dozens, while two governments count their positions in decades. 31 people dead. Hospitals turning patients away. No fuel for ambulances. 11 million people in the dark while Washington and Havana argue about the legal vocabulary of a revolution that happened before most of them were born. So here is the question I am putting to this audience, and I want the full range of answers because this is genuinely contested. Should Cuba say the word? If saying theft ends the blockade today, saves lives today, and unlocks $8 billion, is holding that word worth the cost of what silence is doing right now? Or does saying it hand the United States a legal weapon that can be turned on any government that has ever challenged American corporate interests? Cuban exiles in this audience and international law scholars in this audience will answer that differently. I want both answers in the comments, and I want you to engage with each other, because the conversation happening in the comments section of this series has become one of the most serious policy discussions happening anywhere online right now. If this broke down something the headlines buried, like it. That one action determines whether this analysis reaches the people in Miami, Havana, and Washington who need to see it, or disappears. Share it with anyone who thinks this standoff is about real estate. It is not about real estate. It never was. It is about a word, $8 billion and 11 million lives waiting to see which one wins. This series updates daily. If you are not subscribed yet, now is the time, because the next development in this story will not wait.